talk a little bit about some of the programs other than Professor Pritchard's?
So the lineup was Bob Romer, class of '52, was the kickoff speaker, and he taught physics here for a number of years, and then started almost a second career as an amateur historian, and wrote an incredible book about slavery in the Connecticut River Valley. So his talk was the first one, and it was called Amherst from Civil War to Civil Rights, talking about the, I guess to sum it up in a couple of words, would be the history of black students and the relationship with the black community locally and within the college. And that was a fascinating way for us to dig into what he called the ancient history of the school, going as far back as the mid-1800s. And then, as Professor Pritchard said, Hugh Hawkins was the next speaker, and it was interesting to see students still turning out for these talks, having no idea who these professors were, because neither of them have taught here since the early 2000s at the latest, whereas Professor Sofield or Professor Pritchard, Townsend, their names are still familiar, certainly to my class, maybe the class under us. But he talked about Amherst in the 50s. His talk was called Amherst Before the 1960s Upheaval. So the goal being sort of to build towards this final talk. And Professor Sofield offered a nice diversion talking about Amherst poets, and that was a different format. He read poems aloud to everybody and analyzed them, did a close reading. James Merrill, a little bit of Frost, Wilbur, and about 9 others. So that was like a class in itself. I didn't have a chance to take a course with him, so I thought, well, let's get him to talk on exactly what I would want to hear him speak on in a course. So that was a wonderful talk. Buffy Aries and Professor O'Hara spoke about the history of women at Amherst College. It was a fascinating talk that sort of brought things a little bit closer to the modern era. And then again, another diversion for something more personal about Professor Pritchard's freshman year. His talk was called Memories of a Freshman. And then we rounded things out with the 60s, Amherst activism then and now, which was Kim Townsend, who's written about that time, written about Bill Ward, the president at the time, and lived through it as a professor, and then Dean Aronson, who was a student during that era. And that talk was, that kind of got to the essence of why I put this series on, which was that the history of the 60s and the tumult of that time, I saw in the little that I knew about it before the talk, so many connections to what we had been going through as a campus since my freshman year, but especially this past fall with Amherst Uprising. And to see how the community came together in such a cathartic way, to me was really special. And I wanted to tap into that energy and that excitement and that passion and connect it to historical Amherst, to ye olde Amherst that we usually brush off as something distant and not related to what we're doing now. But it's very much a continuum, and that's what I wanted to try to show with that talk. I thought that Dean Aronson and Professor Townsend really did that excellently. But those were all of the talks, and if anybody did miss them, inexcusably so, they're all recorded and on the Amherst website.